Good evening, dear friends, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Wherever you're listening from tonight, maybe tucked safely under the blankets, curled up in your favorite quiet corner of the house, or perhaps lying somewhere peaceful while the world slowly quiets down outside. I'm so happy you're here with me. Take a slow, gentle breath in. Let your shoulders soften and drop. Maybe pull the blanket or duvet up just a little higher, and allow the day to quietly drift away. London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening in 1892. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, violin idle in his lap, craving some small challenge to stir his restless mind. Then came the hesitant knock, soft as falling leaves. An elderly naval captain arrived, distraught. His priceless family heirloom, an antique mariner's compass once belonging to Nelson himself, had vanished from his locked study. No forced entry, no footprints, only the faint scent of pipe tobacco lingering where none should be. Scotland Yard dismissed it as a servant's petty theft, but Holmes saw a link. The compass needle still pointed north in memory, yet its case bore an odd scratch like a hurried message. One link in a chain that would gently bind the truth. The game was afoot. Chapter 1. The First Link. I set these words down in my journal as the events unfolded, in the quiet autumn of 1892, when the fogs of London wrapped the city like a soft gray blanket, and the gas lamps glowed with gentle amber light. That evening, the sitting room at 221B Baker Street felt especially warm and sheltered. The coal fire burned steadily in the grate, giving off a low, comforting crackle and sending little waves of heat across the carpet. The smell of burning coal mixed pleasantly with the faint, rich scent of Holmes's tobacco from the old Persian slipper, and the lingering aroma of Mrs. Hudson's shortbread, which she had brought up earlier with our tea. Holmes had spent most of the day in one of his quiet, drifting moods. He sat in his usual armchair, long legs stretched toward the fire, the Stradivarius resting across his lap. Every now and then he would pluck 2 or 3 soft notes, slow, thoughtful, almost sleepy, and let them hang in the warm air before fading away. I was reading the evening paper, half listening to the distant sound of hansom cabs rolling along Baker Street, wheels hissing gently on the damp stones. Just after 8:30, the bell rang below. A few moments later, Mrs. Hudson appeared at the door, her small silver tray still in her hands. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes, Captain Reginald Hargrove. He says the matter is most particular, and he would be very grateful for even a few minutes of your time." Holmes lifted one eyebrow, set the violin carefully aside, and said in his calm, curious voice, "Show him up, Mrs. Hudson. Let us hear what brings a sea captain to Baker Street on such a foggy night." Captain Hargrove was a tall, broad-shouldered man of about 70, with thick white side whiskers, and hands that had clearly spent decades holding ropes and helms. His heavy overcoat smelled faintly of salt and old wool, and the cuffs of his trousers were slightly damp from walking through the fog. He carried a stout walking stick with a worn brass band, and when he removed his hat, I noticed his eyes were very pale, almost sea-washed blue. He sat down in the chair opposite Holmes, accepted the cup of tea Mrs. Hudson pressed into his hands, and gave a long, tired sigh. "I hardly know how to begin, Mr. Holmes," he said. "It sounds such a small thing when spoken aloud, and yet it has shaken me more than any storm I ever faced at sea." Holmes leaned forward slightly, fingertips pressed together. Small things are often the most revealing, Captain. Pray tell us exactly what has happened." The captain took a slow sip of tea, then set the cup down with care. "I own a modest house in Chelsea, near the river. In my study, I keep a few family treasures. One of them is an old mariner's compass, brass and rosewood, with a card painted by hand. It belonged to my great-uncle, who served under Nelson. The instrument itself is not worth a great deal of money, perhaps 15 or 20 pounds if sold to a dealer. But to me, it is beyond price. It has been in our family for more than 90 years. He paused, looking down at his large weathered hands. 2 nights ago, I showed it to my nephew Lionel. He often visits, and he has always been fascinated by the old things in my study. We sat by the fire, had a glass of brandy, talked of ships and voyages. He left just before 10 o'clock. I locked the study door myself, as I always do, and went to bed. Yesterday morning, when I opened the door again, the compass was gone. The box still sat on the shelf, lid open. Nothing else had been touched. No window broken, no sign of forced entry. Holmes had not moved, but his eyes had taken on that quiet, bright look I knew so well. "Did you call the police?" he asked. "I did. An inspector came yesterday afternoon. He looked about for 10 minutes, asked me if I had any enemies or debts, then told me it was most likely one of the servants or a tradesman who had taken advantage of an unlocked moment. He said such things happen every day in London, and that I should make a list of anyone who had been in the house recently. Then he left." The captain gave a short, dry laugh that held no humor. "I have had the same servants for 15 years. None of them would dream of taking so much as a spoon." And yet the inspector seemed quite satisfied to leave it at that. Holmes rose smoothly from his chair and walked over to the window, looking down through the fog at the gas lamps burning in the street below. "Captain Hargrove," he said without turning, "will you describe the box and the compass in more detail?" "Rosewood case, about 8 inches square. Hinged lid with a small brass catch. Inside, the compass card is cream-colored, the points marked in faded black ink. The needle is blued steel. On the outside of the lid there's a faint engraved anchor and the initials H.N., supposed to stand for Horatio Nelson, though I have never been certain. Yesterday morning, when I found the box empty, there was a new scratch on the brass rim. A small, shallow mark. It looked almost like the letter L. Holmes turned, his face calm and attentive. "L for Lionel, perhaps?" I suggested from my chair. "That was my first thought, too," the captain admitted. "But Lionel left before I locked the room. And why would he take it? He knows how much it means to me." Holmes walked back to the fireplace and stood with one hand resting on the mantel, looking down into the flames. "Tell me, Captain," he said, "did your nephew smoke while he was with you that evening?" "Yes. He has taken up a light pipe tobacco recently. Rather sweet, unlike my own stronger blend." "And you both smoked in the study?" "We did." Holmes gave the smallest of nods. "Very good. Watson, be so kind as to accompany me tomorrow morning to Chelsea. Captain Hargrove, if you would be good enough to leave the house exactly as it was yesterday morning, no cleaning, no moving of objects, I should be most obliged." The captain rose, looking suddenly lighter, as though some small part of the weight had already been lifted from his shoulders. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Holmes. Shall I expect you at 10 o'clock? 10 will suit admirably." After the captain had gone, the room felt very still again. Only the soft pop of coal and the faint ticking of the clock on the shelf. Holmes returned to his chair picked up his pipe, and began to fill it slowly. "The first link, Watson," he said quietly. "A locked room, an untouched box, a single fresh scratch shaped like the letter L, and somewhere in the air of that study, I suspect, the faint smell of sweet pipe tobacco that should not have been there after the captain locked the door." He struck a match, held it to the bowl, and drew in a long, thoughtful breath. "The chain has begun." Chapter 2. Forging connections. The following morning, the fog had lifted only a little. A thin gray veil still hung over Baker Street, making the gas lamps look like soft yellow moons even at 9:30. I woke to the familiar sounds of Holmes moving about the sitting room, the quiet clink of the gasogene as he prepared soda water, the soft scrape of a match against the box, and the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to himself while sorting through a small pile of telegrams that had arrived with the first post. I found him standing by the window, pipe already drawing, watching a hansom cab pull away down the street. The room smelled pleasantly of fresh coffee, bitter and hot, and the faint sweetness of Virginia tobacco. He turned as I entered, eyes bright. "Good morning, Watson. I have sent a wire to Captain Hargrove confirming our arrival at 10. We shall begin by speaking with the nephew, Lionel Hargrove. His lodgings are in Villiers Street, near the Strand. After that, we have 2 more calls to make." By 10 minutes past 10, we were rattling along the embankment in a hansom, the horse's hooves making a steady, soothing clip-clop on the wet macadam. The river smelled of mud and tar. A barge horn gave a long, mournful note somewhere out in the mist. Holmes sat silent for most of the journey, fingers steepled under his chin, but once he murmured, "The scratch shaped like an L. Not deep, not angry, more like the mark of someone who hesitated." Villiers Street was narrow and busy even in the morning. Lionel Hargrove occupied 2 modest rooms above a bookseller's shop. We climbed a creaky wooden staircase that smelled of old paper and boiled cabbage. When Lionel opened the door, he looked surprised, then quickly composed himself. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, please come in. My uncle wired that you might call." He was a pleasant-looking young man of about 28, clean-shaven, with fair hair and the beginnings of a worried frown between his brows. His sitting room was small but tidy. A writing desk covered in papers, a shelf of law books — he was reading for the bar — and a single armchair pulled close to a tiny coal fire. The air carried the light, sweet scent of his pipe tobacco, quite different from Holmes's stronger blend. We sat. Lionel offered us coffee, which we declined. "Your uncle tells me his compass has disappeared," Holmes began quietly. "He showed it to you 2 nights ago." Lionel nodded at once. "Yes, he's shown it to me many times since I was a boy. I always loved the way the needle trembled and then steadied, as though it remembered the sea." We talked about my great-uncle's voyages, about Nelson. I left at 9:45. I took a cab straight to my club in Pall Mall. Several people saw me there until after midnight. Holmes regarded him calmly. "You are in some financial difficulty, Mr. Hargrove?" The young man flushed, but answered steadily. "I am. A speculation in South American railway shares went badly last spring. I owe a few £100, but I would sooner beg from my uncle than steal from him. That compass means more to him than money ever could." Holmes inclined his head. "Did you handle the compass box that evening?" I took it down from the shelf to look at it more closely. I opened it, closed it again. I may have been a little clumsy. I was tired. Holmes rose and walked to the small window that overlooked the street. He appeared to study the passers-by below, but I knew he was thinking. "When you left the house in Chelsea, did you return later that night?" Lionel looked startled. "No. Why would I?" Holmes turned back. "Merely a question. One more thing. Your cufflinks. I notice one of them has a tiny, fresh scratch across the anchor motif. It matches very closely the mark on the compass box." Lionel glanced down at his cuffs and gave a small, surprised laugh. "Good heavens! I hadn't noticed. I must have caught it on something. I'm forever scraping them against desk edges." Holmes gave the faintest smile. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove. You have been most helpful." As our cab carried us toward Leadenhall Market, Holmes spoke softly. "The second link, Watson. His tobacco is sweet and light. There was a trace of exactly that scent lingering in the study the next morning, after the door had been locked for hours. Someone returned, or someone stayed behind." Our next visit was to the premises of Mr. Elias Thorne, nautical instrument maker and dealer, a narrow shop squeezed between a tea merchant and a seller of ship's chronometers. Inside it smelled strongly of brass polish, linseed oil, and old leather bindings. Mr. Thorne was a small, neat man of 60, wearing a green baize apron and half-moon spectacles. He listened to Holmes's description of the missing compass with keen interest. "A Nelson era piece? Very rare. I've not seen one come through my shop in years. If it had been pawned or sold anywhere respectable in London, word would have reached me by now." Holmes picked up a similar compass from the counter and turned it in his fingers. "You have known Captain Hargrove for some time? 20 years or more. A fine gentleman, always paid promptly. If he says the compass is gone, then gone it is." "Did Lionel Hargrove ever visit your shop alone?" Thorne thought for a moment. "Once or twice, yes. He bought a small sextant last year as a birthday gift for his uncle. Polite young man. A little short of money lately, I believe. He asked about second-hand instruments." Holmes set the compass down. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." Our final call of the morning was to a small chop-house near the docks, where sailors and clerks took their midday meal. The air was thick with the smell of fried onions, vinegar, and damp wool. Holmes spoke quietly to the landlord, then to a grizzled boatswain who was nursing a pint in the corner. "Aye, I saw young Hargrove here 2 nights back," the man said in a gravelly voice. "Sat in that booth there with another fellow. Tall chap, dark coat, kept his hat on. They talked low, looked like family business. The young one seemed upset. Mentioned something about a keepsake and not wanting to lose it. Then they left separately. Holmes thanked him with a shilling for his trouble. Back in the hansom, heading toward Baker Street, he spoke again. "Links are forming, Watson. The sweet tobacco in the locked study, the matching scratch on cuff and compass, the late-night meeting near the river. And yet, no pawn ticket, no sale, no desperate attempt to raise money. The chain grows, but it does not yet point clearly to theft for gain." That evening, after a simple supper of cold beef and pickles, we sat by the fire. Holmes had taken up his violin again and was drawing long, slow notes, gentle, almost lullaby-like. The coal settled with soft pops. Rain began tapping quietly against the window. I looked across at him. "What do you make of it all, Holmes?" He lowered the bow. "I think, Watson, that the compass was not stolen for money. It was taken for memory, or for love, or perhaps for fear. The chain is taking shape. Tomorrow we return to Chelsea, and examined the study once more, by daylight. He smiled faintly. The connections are forging themselves, link by link. Soon the whole will be plain. Chapter 3. The Chain Grows. The next morning brought a thin, pale sunlight that struggled through the fog and made the wet pavements of Baker Street gleam like polished steel. I rose to find Holmes already dressed and standing by the mantel, examining a small envelope he had just opened. The fire had been freshly made up. Its warmth pushed back the morning chill and filled the room with the clean smell of burning apple wood, mingled with the ever-present tobacco. "Captain Hargrove has sent a note," Holmes said without looking up. "He asks us to come as soon as convenient. He has remembered something else, something about the study window." We took a hansom directly to Chelsea. The horses' hooves rang steadily on the cobbles. Every now and then a wheel would splash through a shallow puddle, sending up a soft hiss. The river air carried the familiar tang of mud and distant coal smoke, and once or twice we heard the low, patient moan of a foghorn drifting across from the opposite bank. Captain Hargrove met us at the door himself. He looked a little less strained than before, though the shadows under his eyes were still deep. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Gentlemen, I spent last night thinking over every detail again. I believe I may have overlooked something small but important." He led us straight to the study. The room felt quieter in daylight. Dust motes drifted lazily in the slanted sunbeams, and the brass telescope by the window caught faint gleams of light. The rosewood box still sat open on the shelf exactly as we had left it. Nothing had been moved. Holmes walked directly to the window. It was a tall sash, latched at the top, with heavy velvet curtains tied back. He examined the latch, then the sill, then crouched to look at the carpet directly beneath. "Here, Watson," he said softly. "The third link." I joined him. On the dark green carpet just inside the window was a very faint, almost invisible crescent of whitish residue, no bigger than half a sixpence. When I bent closer, I caught a faint, clean smell, not salt exactly, but something crisp and mineral, like sea-washed chalk or the powder left after drying salt water. Holmes touched it lightly with a fingertip and brought it to his nose. Plaster dust. Fresh, and mixed with a trace of sodium chloride, sea salt. Not household dust. This came from outside. Captain Hargrove stepped forward, but the window was latched from the inside. I checked it myself the night the compass vanished. Holmes straightened. Latched, yes, but not locked against pressure from without, if someone knew precisely where to apply it. He ran his fingers along the lower sash. There, almost hidden by the paint, was a hair-thin line where the wood had been gently prized, recently enough that the paint had not yet cracked fully. Someone used a thin blade, perhaps a pocket knife, and eased the sash up just far enough to reach inside. They did not enter fully. They reached, took the compass from its shelf, and withdrew. The plastered dust fell from their sleeve or cuff as they stretched. The window was then carefully closed again and relatched from outside with the same blade. A neat, patient piece of work. I looked from Holmes to the captain. Then it was not one of the household after all. "Not necessarily one who stayed inside," Holmes replied, "but someone who knew the room well enough to reach the shelf without stepping over the sill. Someone of at least average height, with steady hands." Captain Hargrove's face had gone very still. Lionel is tall, and he has always been dexterous. He could tie the most perfect bowline knot by the age of 8. Holmes turned away from the window and walked slowly round the room, eyes moving from object to object. "There is more," he said. "Observe the hearth-rug." A small Turkish rug lay before the fireplace. In the center, almost invisible against the dark reds and blues, was a single short strand of pale thread, almost the color of undyed wool. Holmes lifted it carefully with tweezers and held it to the light. Worsted. From a good quality sock or glove, not the captain's, he favors cotton. Not the butler's, his socks are black wool. But Lionel wears light gray worsted in winter. I noticed it yesterday. The captain sank slowly into his desk chair. Then it was Lionel after all. Holmes did not answer at once. Instead, he moved to the bookshelf and took down the empty compass box again. He turned it over, studying the base. "The fourth link," he said quietly. "Here, on the underside where no one would normally look, 3 tiny pin pricks forming a triangle. Fresh, made with something very sharp and fine. A needle, perhaps, or the point of a watchmaker's tool." He looked up at me. "Someone opened the box after it was taken, not to steal anything further, there was nothing else inside, but to examine something, to read something, or to leave something." Captain Hargrove leaned forward. "There is nothing inside but the compass card and the needle." "Precisely," Holmes said. "And yet someone took the trouble to open it in darkness or semi-darkness, mark it with needle pricks, and close it again. That speaks of care, of purpose beyond simple theft." He replaced the box exactly as it had been. "I recall," he continued, his voice dropping into that reflective tone I knew so well, "the case of the Musgrave ritual. You remember it, Watson. A household treasure vanished, not for its value, but because it concealed an ancient parchment of instructions. Everyone looked for gold or jewels. No one thought to search for paper hidden in plain sight. The criminal was a butler who had served the family for years, yet his motive was not greed, but legacy. A family secret he believed belonged to him by right of long service. Small marks on an old oak chest betrayed him. Pinpricks exactly like these, made when he tested the panels for a hidden spring. The marks were so fine, we nearly missed them. But once seen, the whole chain fell into place. Service, loyalty, inheritance, betrayal. The treasure was restored, the butler dismissed quietly, and the family secret kept within the walls where it belonged." Holmes paused, letting the memory settle. "Here, too, I suspect we are dealing not with common theft, but with something more intimate. A keepsake that holds more than brass and lodestone. A message, a memory, a claim." He turned to Captain Hargrove. "Sir, has this compass ever been opened in your presence? Has anyone ever taken the card out, or examined the back of it?" The old man frowned, thinking. "Never. It has always remained sealed. My great-uncle sealed it himself before he died. Said it was to stay that way until the right time." Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. "Then the chain grows stronger. Someone believes the right time has come." We left the house an hour later. In the hansom on the way back to Baker Street, the rain began again, soft, steady, tapping on the roof like distant fingers. Holmes sat silent for a long time, then spoke just once. "The links are no longer scattered, Watson. They are beginning to connect. Plaster dust, a thread, needle pricks, sweet tobacco in a locked room, a hesitant scratch shaped like L. Soon the pattern will be clear." That evening, as the fire burned low and the rain whispered against the window, I watched him sit with his violin across his knees, drawing one long, gentle note after another, almost a lullaby. "The chain grows stronger," he had said, and I believed him. Chapter 4. Testing the links. The rain had stopped by afternoon, leaving the London streets glossy and reflective under a pale, watery sun. The air outside, 221B Baker Street, smelt clean and cool, with just a trace of wet coal smoke drifting down from the chimneys. Inside, the sitting room felt especially snug. The fire had settled into a steady, glowing bed of embers that gave off gentle warmth, and the faint scent of applewood lingered pleasantly alongside Holmes's pipe tobacco. Holmes had spent the morning at the small table near the window, surrounded by a scattering of notes, a magnifying glass, and 3 small envelopes containing the tiny fragments we had collected, the plastered dust, the worsted thread, and a careful rubbing of the needle pricks on the compass box. He had examined each under the lens with patient care, then written short observations in his sharp, slanting hand. I was pouring myself a second cup of tea, hot, strong, with a comforting taste of bergamot, when he looked up. "Watson, we must test the strength of these links before we go any further. Several of them appear solid, but 1 or 2 may yet prove brittle. Today we shall place them under gentle strain and see which hold and which bend." Our first test took us back to Villiers Street. Lionel Hargrove received us again in his small sitting room. The fire was low but bright, and the air carried the same light, sweet tobacco fragrance as before. He looked slightly more at ease than on our previous visit, though his fingers kept turning a pencil over and over on the desk. Holmes sat down without ceremony. "Mr. Hargrove, I should like to ask you to perform a small experiment for me. Would you be so kind as to stand here?" He indicated a spot near the window. "And reach up toward that bookshelf, as though you were taking down a heavy book from the top shelf." Lionel looked puzzled, but complied. He stretched up, arm extended, fingers brushing the top shelf. Holmes watched closely. "Now, if you would do the same again, but this time with your left hand only." Lionel hesitated, then reached with his left arm. The movement was noticeably more awkward. His shoulder lifted, and he had to rise slightly onto his toes. Holmes gave a small nod. "Thank you. That will do." Outside, as we walked back to the waiting hansom, he spoke quietly. The plaster dust fell from the right sleeve. The reach was made by a right-handed person of at least 5 feet 10 inches. Lionel Hargrove is left-handed when reaching for anything above shoulder height. I noticed it yesterday when he took down a book to show us a passage. The link weakens. Our second call was to Captain Hargrove's house in Chelsea. The captain was waiting in the drawing room, a cup of tea untouched beside him. Holmes asked to be left alone in the study for a quarter of an hour. When he emerged, he carried the compass box and a small folding rule. "Captain, may I ask Simmons, your butler, to step in for a moment?" Simmons appeared promptly, his black coat immaculate, his face expressionless. Holmes addressed him calmly. "Simmons, I should like you to stand here and reach up to the shelf where the compass box normally sits, exactly as though you were placing it there." The butler stepped forward without hesitation. He was a tall man, nearly 6 feet, and his reach was easy and straight. His right arm extended smoothly, fingers closing around an imaginary object. Holmes watched the motion with great attention. "Now, if you would kindly do the same movement again, but this time slowly, and stop when I say." Simmons repeated the action. When his hand was at full stretch, Holmes said, "There." The butler froze. Holmes stepped close and examined the sleeve of Simmons's coat. Near the cuff, caught in the fine wool, was a single short thread of pale worsted, exactly like the one we had found on the hearth rug. Simmons's face remained calm, but a faint flush appeared at his neck. Holmes spoke gently. "That thread did not come from your own socks, Simmons. Yours are black wool. Whose would it be?" The butler swallowed once. I cannot say, sir." Holmes stepped back. "Thank you. That is all for now." When Simmons had left, Captain Hargrove looked shaken. "Surely not Simmons. He has been with me since he was a boy." Holmes shook his head. "Not Simmons himself, but someone who brushed against him or borrowed from him. The thread is a borrowed link, not a direct one. It weakens the case against any single person in the household." Our third test took us to Mr. Thorne's shop in Leadenhall Street. The little instrument maker greeted us warmly and led us to the back room where he kept his tools. Holmes laid the compass box on the workbench and pointed to the 3 tiny pin-pricks on the underside. "Mr. Thorne, you work with fine instruments every day. Would you say these marks were made by a needle or by some other tool?" Thorne took up a magnifying lens and studied the tiny triangle for a long moment. "A needle," he said at last. "A very fine one. Perhaps a number 9 or 10. Not a watchmaker's oiler or a scribe. Definitely a sewing needle." Holmes nodded. "And would you keep such needles here?" "Only for thread repairs on canvas instrument cases, but they are thicker, number 5 or 6. I've not used anything as fine as this in years." Holmes thanked him, and we left. In the cab on the way back to Baker Street, Holmes sat with his eyes half closed, fingers steepled under his chin. 3 links tested, Watson. 1 weakened. Lionel's left-handed reach makes it unlikely he stretched through the window. 1 borrowed. The worsted thread may have come from anyone who passed close to Simmons. 1 confirmed. The needle pricks are domestic, not professional. Not the work of a dealer or pawnbroker. He opened his eyes and looked at me. Yet the sweet tobacco smell in the locked study remains. That link has not yet been tested. And the scratch shaped like an L still points, however faintly, in Lionel's direction. That evening we sat by the fire in our familiar chairs. The coal had burned down to a soft red glow. The room felt warm and sheltered. Rain had begun again, tapping quietly against the window panes like someone playing a gentle, absent-minded tune. Holmes had taken up his violin and was drawing long, slow notes. Nothing dramatic, just quiet, flowing phrases that seemed to follow the rhythm of the rain. I sipped a small glass of brandy. The taste was rich and warming on my tongue. I broke the silence. "So several of our links have bent a little. Does that mean we must start again?" Holmes lowered the bow and smiled faintly. "No, Watson. Bent links are valuable. They show us where the chain is not yet true. The strong ones remain. The plaster, dust from outside, the needle pricks made in haste, the faint, sweet tobacco that had no business being there after the door was locked. These hold firm." He set the violin aside and leaned back, eyes on the fire. "Tomorrow, we test the last and most stubborn link, the scent of tobacco in a locked room. And when we have done that, I think the chain will begin to show its final shape." I nodded, feeling the quiet certainty in his voice. The rain continued to fall, soft and steady. Somewhere in the city, the truth was still waiting, patient, gentle, and almost within reach. Chapter 5, The chain tightens. The following day dawned cold and still, with a thin frost glazing the window panes of 221 B. Baker Street. Inside, the coal fire burned steadily, its warmth spreading across the carpet in gentle waves. The room carried the comforting smells of fresh coffee, toasted bread, and the faint, rich curl of Holmes's morning pipe. Outside, the street was quiet. Only the occasional soft clop of a horse's hooves and the distant chime of a church bell broke the hush. Holmes had risen early. When I came down, he was already at the breakfast table, a small tin box open before him. Inside lay a short length of fine sewing needle, a scrap of pale worsted thread, and a tiny glass vial containing the plaster dust we had collected. "Today, Watson," he said without preamble, "we tighten the chain. The remaining links are few but stubborn. The sweet tobacco scent in the locked study is one of them. We shall test it directly." He closed the tin with a soft click. After breakfast, we return to Chelsea. This time, we bring a small experiment of our own. We arrived at Captain Hargrove's house just after 11. The captain met us in the hall, looking more composed than before, though his hands still clasped and unclasped behind his back. "Mr. Holmes, I have followed your instructions. The study has not been aired or cleaned. The servants have been told to stay away from that room entirely." "Excellent," Holmes replied. "We shall need perhaps half an hour undisturbed." The study felt colder than on our previous visits. The fire had not been lit since the morning before, and a faint chill clung to the books and furniture. The rosewood box still sat open on the shelf, exactly as we had left it. Holmes closed the door behind us and turned the key in the lock with deliberate care. "Now, Watson, observe." From his coat pocket he produced a small glass bottle with a ground glass stopper. He uncorked it. A light, sweet fragrance drifted out, exactly the same mild Virginia blend Lionel Hargrove smoked. Holmes held the bottle near the shelf where the compass had rested. "This is the same tobacco the nephew uses. I purchased a small quantity from the tobacconist near his lodgings yesterday evening. Now watch." He uncorked the bottle again and let the scent drift for a few seconds, then quickly recorked it and placed the bottle on the desk. We waited in silence. After 5 minutes, Holmes moved to the window and examined the sill once more. He ran a finger along the lower edge of the sash and held it up to the light. A very faint trace of whitish dust still clung. "The plaster dust remains," he murmured. "But the scent—" He walked slowly round the room, nostrils slightly flared. "Has already begun to fade. Yet, when the captain opened the door the morning after the theft, the sweet tobacco smell was distinct, strong enough to notice immediately, even though the room had been locked for hours." He stopped near the hearth. "The fourth link tightens here, Watson. Tobacco smoke does not linger indefinitely in a closed room, especially one with a chimney that draws well. If Lionel, or anyone, had smoked in here after the theft and before the door was unlocked, the scent would have dissipated long before morning. But it did not. Therefore, the tobacco was not smoked in the room at all." I frowned. "Then how?" Holmes turned to me, eyes bright. "Someone brought the scent with them, on their clothes, perhaps, or in a small sachet or pouch carried close to the body. They reached through the window, took the compass, left the scratch in haste, closed the sash again, and all the while the sweet fragrance drifted from their person into the still air of the study." He stepped closer to the window. "The reach was made from outside. The plaster dust proves it. The needle pricks prove someone opened the box later, in a place of safety, and the tobacco proves that person carried the same blend as Lionel Hargrove." He paused. "But we have already seen that Lionel is left-handed when reaching high. The stretch through this window requires a right-handed motion for balance and precision. Therefore, the person who took the compass was not Lionel himself." Captain Hargrove, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, drew in a sharp breath. "Then who?" Holmes did not answer at once. Instead, he crouched again beside the hearthrug and lifted the single pale worsted thread once more with tweezers. "This thread," he said softly, "came from a glove or sock. Not Simmons's, not the captain's, but someone who brushed against Simmons or borrowed from him on the evening in question." He stood. "I believe we have enough now to confront the chain's final weak point." We left the study and walked the short distance to the small square garden behind the house. A narrow path ran along the back wall, directly beneath the study window. The ground was still damp from the recent rain. In one spot, half hidden by a low shrub, was a single, clear footprint, narrow, with a slightly worn heel. Beside it lay a tiny scrap of pale wool, caught on a thorn. Holmes knelt and examined both. The footprint is a woman's shoe, size 4 or 4.5. The wool matches the thread exactly. He rose slowly. "The chain tightens, Watson. No escape now for the one who wore that shoe." We returned to the house. In the drawing room, Captain Hargrove waited with a young woman of about 25, slender, dark-haired, dressed in a simple gray wool gown. She stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes downcast. I recognized her at once as Ellen, the captain's parlor-maid, who had spoken to us briefly on our first visit. Holmes addressed her gently. "Ellen, I believe you have something to tell us." The girl lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady. "I took it, sir. The compass, 2 nights ago." Captain Hargrove gave a small sound of disbelief. "But why, Ellen? You have been with us since you were 15. She looked at him with quiet sorrow. "Because it was my mother's, sir, not yours, not really." A long silence followed. Holmes spoke into it. "Continue, if you please." Ellen drew a shaky breath. "My mother worked here many years ago, before she married. She was the captain's sister's lady's maid. When she left to be married, the captain's sister gave her the compass as a keepsake, said it had belonged to their great-uncle, but that it should go to someone who loved the sea as much as she did. My mother kept it hidden. She never told anyone. When she died last year, she left me a letter. It said the compass was mine by right, and that inside it was something more precious than brass." She looked at Holmes. "I came back that night. I waited until everyone was asleep. I reached through the window. I'd seen the latch was loose for months. I took the box, opened it in the garden shed with my mother's old needle, and found what she meant. A tiny, folded paper tucked behind the compass card. A letter my mother wrote to the captain's sister long ago, full of thanks and love and promises. It was all she had left of that friendship." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I only wanted the letter. I meant to put the compass back the next night, but I was frightened. I hid it instead. I'm so sorry, sir." Captain Hargrove sat down heavily. "I never knew. My sister never spoke of giving it away." Holmes inclined his head. "The chain is nearly complete." The sweet tobacco scent came from the pouch of tobacco Ellen carried in her apron pocket. given to her by Lionel as a small gift weeks before. He smokes the same blend. The scratch, shaped like L, was her nervous attempt to mark the box so she could find it again in the dark. The plaster dust fell from the wall as she reached. The worsted thread came from the gloves she borrowed from Simmons's coat pocket to keep her hands warm. He turned to the captain. The compass is safe. The letter is safe. No real harm has been done, only a misunderstanding of ownership and a daughter's wish to keep her mother's memory close. Ellen looked up, trembling. "Will I be sent away, sir?" Captain Hargrove rose slowly and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No, Ellen, you will not. The compass was never truly mine to begin with. It belongs where your mother wished it to be, with you." Holmes stepped back, a faint, satisfied smile touching his lips. The chain tightens, and no escape now, except into understanding and forgiveness. Outside, the frost was beginning to melt under the weak afternoon sun. Somewhere, a church bell tolled softly, marking the hour. The truth had come home at last, quietly, gently, and without chains of iron. Chapter 6. Links to the past. The frost had melted by late afternoon, leaving the Chelsea pavements dark and glistening. A soft wind came off the river, carrying the clean, damp smell of wet stone and distant coal fires. Inside Captain Hargrove's house, the drawing room felt warm and sheltered. The fire had been built up again, its flames dancing gently behind the brass fender and sending little sparks of light across the polished furniture. The air held the comforting sense of burning applewood, hot tea, and the faint trace of Ellen's lavender soap as she stood quietly near the window. Captain Hargrove sat in his favorite armchair, the old leather creaking softly as he shifted. He held a small folded paper in his hands, the letter Ellen had found behind the compass card. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. He had read it twice already, slowly, his lips moving without sound. Holmes and I sat opposite him on the sofa. Holmes had set the rosewood compass box on the low table between us. Its brass gleamed softly in the firelight. The needle inside still pointed steadily north, as though nothing at all had changed. The captain looked up at last. "I never knew my sister gave the compass away," he said quietly. "She was 10 years older than I, more like a second mother after our parents died. She never married. She kept house for me here until she passed 20 years ago. She was fond of Ellen's mother, Mary, very fond. Mary came to us as a girl of 16, bright, gentle, quick with a needle. My sister taught her to read properly, lent her books, treated her almost like family." He smoothed the letter on his knee. "This confirms what Ellen said. Mary wrote it the week before she left to marry. She thanks my sister for everything, for the kindness, for the compass, for the promise that it would one day belong to her own child if she had one. She says, it has always reminded me of calm seas and safe harbors. I shall keep it close and tell my little ones the stories you told me." He paused, eyes distant. There never were any little ones mentioned in the family letters after that. I assumed Mary had no children. But Ellen is 25 now, and that would make Mary 40 when she had her. Ellen stepped forward a little. "My mother was 43 when I was born, sir. She always said I was her late blessing. She never spoke much about her time here, only that she had worked for kind people, and that one day she would give me something precious. When she died last winter, she gave me the letter and told me where the compass was kept. She made me promise not to take it until I was sure it was the right moment. Holmes leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled under his chin. "And what made you decide the moment had come, Ellen?" The girl looked down at her hands. "I overheard Mr. Lionel talking to the captain one evening about money troubles. He said he might have to sell family things to settle debts. I was frightened he would sell the compass without knowing its true history. I thought, if I took it first, I could keep my mother's letter safe, and perhaps one day explain everything. I never meant to keep the compass itself. Only the letter." Captain Hargrove gave a long sigh. "I wish you had come to me, child." "I was afraid, sir. Afraid you would think I was stealing. Afraid you would send me away." Holmes spoke gently into the quiet that followed. "The links to the past are now clear. The compass was never merely an heirloom of the Hargrove line. It carried a second story, a story of friendship between two women, one mistress and one maid, bound by kindness rather than blood. That friendship left its mark. The hidden letter, the needle pricks made in haste by a daughter seeking her mother's words, the borrowed worsted gloves to keep warm on a cold night, the sweet tobacco sachet given by a kind young man who had no idea how his small gift would help conceal the truth for a few hours." He touched the compass box lightly. "Every small observation connects now to the history behind it. The plaster dust from the wall fell because Ellen stretched from the garden path she had walked 1,000 times as a child. The footprint in the damp earth was hers, small, careful, familiar with the ground. The scratch shaped like an L was not for Lionel, but for letter, the first letter of the word she most wanted to protect." Ellen wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. "I should have trusted you, sir. I'm truly sorry." The captain rose slowly and crossed to her. He placed both hands on her shoulders. "You kept a promise to your mother. That is no small thing. And you have brought back a piece of my sister I did not know was missing." He turned to Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, I cannot thank you enough. You have not only found what was lost, you have uncovered a part of my own family's heart I had forgotten." Holmes inclined his head. "The past and present are joined now. One unbroken chain. No violence, no malice, only a quiet wish to hold memory close. Such cases are rare, but they remind us that deduction serves truth, not merely justice." We sat for a little while longer. Ellen brought fresh tea. The cups steamed gently, their warmth comforting against cold fingers. The captain read the letter once more, this time aloud in a low, steady voice. The words were simple: gratitude, affection, promises of remembrance, but they filled the room like soft music. When the light began to fade and the gas lamps were lit in the street outside, Holmes rose. "We should leave you now, Captain. The compass is back where it belongs, with Ellen, and, through her, with the memory of two women who valued each other." Captain Hargrove walked us to the door himself. "Will you come again, Mr. Holmes? Not for a case, for tea, perhaps, and to see the compass on the shelf where it always stood." Holmes smiled faintly. "I should be honored." Outside, the evening fog was beginning to gather again, softening the gaslights into gentle halos. The hansom waited at the curb, its horse stamping quietly. As we climbed in, Holmes spoke once more. "The chain is whole now, Watson. Past and present. One unbroken line. Sometimes the strongest links are not iron or steel, but memory and kindness." I nodded, watching the lights of Chelsea slip away behind us. The city moved on around us, hansoms rattling, footsteps on wet stone, the distant hoot of a steamer on the Thames. But inside me there was a quiet peace. The mystery had ended not with handcuffs or shame, but with understanding, and that, I thought, was the gentlest solution of all. Chapter 7. The Complete Chain. The fog had thickened again by evening, turning the streets of Baker Street into soft tunnels of gray and gold, where each gas lamp burned like a small, patient moon. Inside 221B, the sitting room felt especially peaceful. The coal fire had settled into a steady, low glow, its warmth wrapped around us like a blanket. The air carried the gentle smells of burning coal, fresh ink from my notebook, and the faint, sweet trace of Holmes's pipe tobacco drifting from the Persian slipper on the mantel. Captain Hargrove had arrived an hour earlier, bringing Ellen with him. They sat together on the sofa opposite us. Ellen, quiet and composed now, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The captain, looking older but calmer, as though a long-held weight had finally lifted. The rosewood compass box rested on the low table between us, its brass catching soft reflections from the fire. Beside it lay the small, folded letter, now carefully pressed flat between two sheets of clean paper. Holmes sat in his usual armchair, legs crossed, fingers steepled under his chin. His eyes held that quiet, satisfied light I had seen so many times at the close of a case. "Captain Hargrove, Ellen," he began in his calm, measured voice, "tonight we shall lay out the complete chain, link by link, so that nothing remains hidden or uncertain. When every piece is accounted for, the truth stands plain and unbreakable." He leaned forward slightly and touched the compass box. "First, the physical evidence links. The plastered dust on the inner sill came from the garden wall beneath the window. Fresh, mixed with sea salt traces from the river Aire. It fell when someone reached through the slightly raised sash. The footprint in the damp earth outside matched a woman's shoe. Size 4.5, Ellen's size exactly. The single strand of pale worsted thread on the hearthrug came from the gloves she borrowed from Simmons's coat pocket to keep her hands warm on the cold night. The scratch, shaped like an L on the brass rim, was made in haste with the point of her mother's old sewing needle. Not in anger, but to remind herself where she had placed the box in the dark shed later. And the 3 tiny pin pricks forming a triangle on the underside of the box were made when she carefully lifted the compass card to find the hidden letter her mother had tucked behind it years before. He paused, letting each detail settle. Second, the timeline links. The compass vanished on the evening Lionel visited, 2 nights before we were called. Lionel left at 9:45. The household retired shortly after. Ellen waited until the house was silent, then slipped out the back door, walked the familiar path to the garden wall, and reached through the window at approximately 11:30. She took only a few seconds, long enough to lift the box, close the sash, and retreat to the shed. She opened the box there by lantern light, found the letter, read it quickly, then hid both compass and letter under an old tarpaulin. She intended to return them the next night, but fear kept her from doing so immediately. Captain Hargrove nodded slowly. "I never heard a sound." "The house is old and thick-walled," Holmes replied. "And you sleep soundly after brandy." He continued without haste. Third, the witness and behavior links. Lionel's cuff link carried a fresh scratch because he had handled the box clumsily 2 evenings earlier. His natural left-handed reach made him grip awkwardly. The sweet tobacco scent that lingered in the locked study came not from anyone smoking there, but from the small pouch of Virginia blend Ellen carried in her apron pocket, a gift Lionel had given her weeks before when she admired his pipe. Simmons saw nothing because Ellen moved like a shadow in her own home. The butler's own gloves lent the worsted thread that first pointed suspicion elsewhere. Every person in the household acted innocently, yet their small, ordinary actions connected to form the chain. Ellen looked down, cheeks faintly pink. "I never meant to cause such trouble." Holmes's voice remained gentle. "You caused none that cannot be mended. And now, the motive links. This was never theft for gain. No pawnbroker saw the compass. No desperate sale was attempted. The act was driven by love and memory. Ellen's mother, Mary, received the compass as a token of deep friendship from the captain's sister. When Mary died, she passed the secret and the letter to her daughter. Ellen believed the compass, and especially the letter, was hers by moral right. Fear that Lionel's financial troubles might force a family sale prompted her to act sooner than she wished. She wanted only the letter. The compass she meant to return. Her hesitation, her care in every movement, her choice to mark the box rather than damage it, all speak of conscience, not crime. He let a moment pass, the fire crackling softly in the quiet. And, finally, the connecting link that binds them all, the needle. A domestic sewing needle, fine and sharp, used by Ellen's mother for years and inherited by her daughter. That same needle made the pin pricks to free the hidden letter. It also made the scratch shaped like L for letter. It ties every physical trace to one person, Ellen, and every motive to one simple human wish, to keep her mother's words safe. Holmes sat back. Every link accounted for. The chain complete. A long silence followed. The captain reached out and placed his hand over Ellen's. "I should have listened more carefully when my sister spoke of Mary. I should have known there were stories I had not heard." Ellen lifted her eyes. "You were kind to me always, sir. That's why I stayed." Captain Hargrove looked at Holmes. "What now, Mr. Holmes? Shall I inform the police? Shall there be consequences?" Holmes shook his head. "No formal charge has been made. No property has been sold or damaged beyond repair. The compass is back in this house, where it has always been, and the letter is restored to its rightful keeper. I see no crime here that the law needs to punish. Only a family matter quietly resolved." He rose smoothly. "The chain is forged in reason, not in iron. It binds truth, not a prisoner." We all stood. The captain shook Holmes's hand, then mine, with quiet gratitude. Ellen curtsied, tears shining but not falling. As they prepared to leave, the captain paused at the door. "May we call again, soon? Not for mysteries, just to sit by the fire, perhaps." Holmes inclined his head. "You will always be welcome." When the door closed behind them, the room felt very still. Holmes returned to his chair, picked up his pipe, and drew a slow, thoughtful breath. I looked across at him. "You knew, didn't you? Almost from the first scratch." "I suspected," he replied softly. "But suspicion is not proof. Only the complete chain is proof." He smiled faintly. "And sometimes, Watson, the gentlest cases are the truest victories." Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a soft curtain. Inside, the fire burned on, steady, warm, and kind. Every link had been accounted for. The chain was complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. The fog had lifted slightly by the following morning, leaving a crisp, clean chill in the London air. Sunlight filtered weakly through the high windows of 221B Baker Street. catching motes of dust that danced lazily above the carpet. The sitting room smelled pleasantly of fresh coffee, warm toast, and the faint, lingering sweetness of Holmes's pipe from the night before. The coal fire had been banked low overnight, and now burned with a steady, comforting glow that pushed back the last traces of autumn cold. Mrs. Hudson had just cleared the breakfast things when the bell rang below. A few moments later she announced Captain Reginald Hargrove and Ellen. They entered together, the captain carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, Ellen holding a simple cloth bag that smelled faintly of lavender and fresh-baked bread. The captain looked rested. The deep lines around his eyes had softened. Ellen wore a neat gray coat and a small smile that had not been there the night before. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," the captain began, voice warm and steady, "we could not let another day pass without coming to thank you properly, and to bring a small token of our gratitude." He set the parcel on the table and unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a fine bottle of old naval rum, dark amber, the label faded but proud, and a small wooden box containing half a dozen excellent cigars. Holmes inclined his head. "You are most kind, Captain, but the thanks belong to the truth itself. It needed only to be uncovered." Ellen stepped forward, opening her cloth bag. She lifted out a small tin wrapped in a clean tea towel. "I baked these last night, sir," she said quietly. "Shortbread, my mother's recipe. She always said the best thanks are the ones you can taste." I accepted the tin with a smile. The buttery fragrance rose at once, rich and comforting. "Ellen, these smell wonderful. We shall enjoy them greatly." We all sat. The captain took the armchair opposite Holmes. Ellen perched on the edge of the sofa, hands folded in her lap. Captain Hargrove cleared his throat. "After you left last night, Ellen and I talked for a long time by the fire. I asked her to show me the letter again. We read it together, slowly. Every word brought my sister back to me. Her handwriting, her turns of phrase, I had almost forgotten how gentle she could be." He looked at Ellen. "I told her that the compass would remain on the study shelf, where it has always stood, but the letter belongs to her. She may keep it in her room, or in a locket, or wherever she chooses. And if ever she wishes to read it with me, the door is open." Ellen's eyes shone. "Thank you, sir. That means more than I can say." Holmes leaned back, fingers steepled. "And the household? Simmons, the other servants, do they know?" The captain nodded. "I gathered them this morning in the kitchen. I told them simply that a family heirloom had been misplaced, that it had now been found, and that the matter was closed with no blame attached." Simmons looked relieved. He had worried that suspicion had fallen somewhere near him. The others were glad to hear the house would return to its quiet ways. Ellen added softly, "Simmons gave me back my mother's old sewing kit this morning. He had kept it safe in the butler's pantry after she left. Said he always hoped someone would ask for it one day." A gentle silence followed, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant clop of a hansom passing in the street below. I looked at Holmes. "And Scotland Yard?" Inspector Gregson was mentioned in the beginning, though he never returned. Holmes gave a small, dry smile. "I sent a brief note to the Yard last night. Compass recovered. No crime committed. Matter closed by mutual consent of all parties. Gregson will be content. He dislikes paperwork almost as much as he dislikes unsolved cases. There will be no further inquiry." Captain Hargrove rose slowly. "Then justice has been served, not with chains of iron, but with understanding. The compass is back where it belongs. The letter is safe, and two families, mine and Ellen's, are a little closer than they were. He extended his hand first to Holmes, then to me. You have given us more than a solution, gentlemen. You have given us peace. Ellen stood too. She curtsied slightly, then, hesitating only a moment, stepped forward and pressed a quick, light kiss to Holmes's cheek. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for seeing what no one else did. Holmes, for once, looked almost startled. Then he smiled, genuinely, softly. You are most welcome. Ellen. They left soon after, the captain promising to send a note when next they would like us to call for tea. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. The room settled again into its familiar calm. Holmes picked up the tin of shortbread, opened it, and offered me one. The biscuit was still warm, crisp at the edges, meltingly buttery, with just a hint of sugar that tasted like home. I took a bite and sighed with pleasure. These are exceptional. Holmes took one for himself, broke it in half, and ate slowly. Simple ingredients, careful hands, memory in every bite, much like the case itself. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. The fog was thinning further. Patches of blue sky showed between the rooftops. Loose ends tied Watson. The criminal, such as she was, bound not by bars, but by kindness. The innocent cleared without ever truly being accused. The household restored to harmony. Scotland Yard satisfied with minimal fuss. He turned back to me. Sometimes justice wears no handcuffs and carries no warrant. It simply arrives, quietly, and takes its proper place. I nodded, watching the firelight play across his sharp features. You were gentle with her, Holmes, from the first moment you suspected. I suspected a daughter's love, not a thief's greed. There is a difference. He returned to his chair, reached for his violin, and began to play. Slow, soft notes that rose and fell like a lullaby. The melody drifted through the room, mingling with the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the city waking. Outside, London continued its steady rhythm, hansoms rattling, footsteps on wet pavements, the low call of a street vendor. Inside, everything felt right again. The criminal had been bound, not harshly, but firmly, with understanding. Justice had been served, not loudly, but surely. And the house in Chelsea would sleep peacefully tonight, under the same roof where old friendships and new promises now rested, side by side. Chapter 9. Links Restored. Several days passed after Captain Hargrove and Ellen's visit to Baker Street. London settled into the gentle rhythm of late autumn. Mornings crisp with frost that melted by noon, afternoons wrapped in pale sunlight, evenings drawing in early with fog that softened every gas lamp into a warm, hazy glow. The city smelled of coal smoke and damp leaves, of hot chestnuts from street vendors, and the faint, clean bite of river air carried inland on the wind. At 221B, the sitting room felt more peaceful than usual. Holmes had returned to his chemical experiments. Small glass retorts bubbled quietly on the side table, filling the air with a faint, sharp scent of carbolic and alcohol. I spent the mornings writing up notes of the case in my journal, the scratch of pen on paper blending with the soft crackle of the fire, and the occasional distant chime of Big Ben drifting through the closed windows. A telegram arrived on the fourth morning. Mrs. Hudson brought it up on her silver tray, her face bright with quiet approval. From Captain Hargrove, gentlemen. He says all is well and invites you both to tea this afternoon at 4. Holmes read the brief message, then handed it to me. Compass safely back on shelf. Letter in Ellen's keeping. Household calm. Tea and shortbread await. A Hargrove. Simple and satisfactory. We arrived in Chelsea just as the light began to slant golden across the square. The captain's house looked the same from the outside. Tall windows, polished brass plate, ivy clinging gently to the brick. But inside everything felt subtly lighter. The hall smelled of fresh polish and baking. From the drawing-room came the soft clink of china and the murmur of voices. Captain Hargrove met us at the door himself. He wore his old naval jacket, the brass buttons gleaming, and his white whiskers seemed somehow less severe. "Gentlemen, welcome. Come through. We have kept the fire going especially for you." The drawing-room was warm and welcoming. The coal fire burned steadily, casting a golden glow across the furniture. Ellen stood near the tea-table, arranging a plate of fresh shortbread and pouring from a large silver pot. She looked up as we entered and gave a small, genuine smile. "Dr. Watson, Mr. Holmes, I'm glad you could come." We sat in a loose circle around the low table. The captain took his usual armchair. Holmes and I settled on the sofa. Ellen passed cups of tea, hot, fragrant with a hint of bergamot, and offered the shortbread first to Holmes. "I made a double batch," she said quietly. "Thought you might like to take some home." Holmes accepted one with a nod of thanks. He broke it carefully and tasted it. "Excellent. Your mother's recipe carries memory in every crumb." The captain cleared his throat. "I wanted you to see for yourselves that order has been restored. The compass is back on its shelf in the study. I have not moved it since Ellen returned it. The letter she keeps in a small rosewood box of her own, beside her bed, she tells me. She reads it sometimes in the evening, and once or twice she has shared passages with me." He looked at Ellen with quiet pride. "She has also begun to tell me stories, little things her mother used to say about my sister, things I never knew. It is as though a door, long closed, has opened again." Ellen set her cup down carefully. "I feel lighter, sir. No more hiding, no more fear. And the house feels kinder somehow." I glanced around the room. Everything was as it had been on our first visit. The nautical books on the shelves, the brass telescope by the window, the globe turned to show the Atlantic, but the air seemed easier to breathe. Holmes spoke softly. "Loose ends have a way of fraying if left untended. Here, every thread has been neatly knotted. The servants know nothing more than that a family matter was quietly settled. Simmons has resumed his duties without shadow. The other maids go about their work with the same cheerful routine. No gossip has spread beyond these walls." Captain Hargrove nodded. "I made sure of that. A few words in the right places, nothing dramatic. Life continues as before, only better." Ellen looked at Holmes directly. "You saw what I was afraid to show anyone. You didn't judge. You just understood. I'll never forget that." Holmes inclined his head. "Understanding is the first step toward restoration, Ellen. The rest follows naturally." We talked for nearly an hour, quietly, without hurry. The captain spoke of his years at sea, of voyages that now seemed distant but fond. Ellen shared a small memory of her mother singing old sea shanties while she sewed. I told them one or two harmless anecdotes from my army days in Afghanistan. Holmes listened more than he spoke, occasionally adding a precise question or a gentle observation that drew the conversation deeper without ever pressing. As the light outside began to fade and the gas lamps were lit in the square, the captain rose. "Before you go, I should like to show you something." He led us to the study. The room was warm. A small fire had been lit in the grate. On the shelf, exactly where it had always stood, sat the rosewood compass box. Its brass caught the firelight and gleamed softly. The scratch shaped like an L was still there, faint now, almost part of the patina. The captain touched the lid lightly. It belongs here, and it belongs to Ellen's story, too. Perhaps one day her children, if she has any, will hear both sides of its history. Ellen stood beside him, eyes bright. "I'd like that, sir." We returned to the hall. The captain shook our hands warmly. Ellen pressed a small, paper-wrapped parcel of shortbread into my hands. "For your tea tomorrow," she said. Outside, the fog was gathering again, wrapping the square in soft gray. The hansom waited at the curb, its lamps glowing like twin stars. As we climbed in, Holmes spoke once, very quietly. "London returns to normal, Watson. But sometimes normal is a little brighter than before." The cab rattled gently over the cobbles. Gas lamps flickered past in golden streaks. Somewhere a foghorn moaned from the river, low, patient, familiar. Inside the house in Chelsea, the fire would burn on through the evening. The compass would rest on its shelf. The letter would lie safe in its small box. Two lives, once separated by time and silence, had been gently reconnected. Order had been restored to this small corner of London's streets. Not with fanfare, not with drama, simply quietly and completely. Chapter 10. By the Fire at Baker Street. A week had passed since our last visit to Chelsea. The autumn fogs had grown thicker, wrapping London in a soft, silvery hush that muffled every sound and turned the gas lamps into gentle golden pools along the streets. At 221B Baker Street, the sitting room felt like a small island of warmth and quiet. The coal fire burned steadily in the grate, sending waves of comforting heat across the room. The air carried the rich, familiar smells of burning coal, strong tobacco from Holmes's pipe, and the faint, buttery sweetness of the last few pieces of Ellen's shortbread, still wrapped in their paper on the side table. I sat in my usual armchair with a glass of hot brandy in my hand, the taste smooth, warm, and slightly sweet on my tongue. Holmes reclined in his own chair opposite, long legs stretched toward the fire, the Stradivarius resting across his knees. He had been plucking soft, idle notes for the past quarter hour, slow, flowing phrases that rose and fell like a gentle tide. Every now and then he paused to draw on his pipe, the bowl glowing red in the dim light, then resumed playing as though the music and the smoke were part of the same quiet rhythm. The case of the stolen compass had ended so gently that it almost felt like a dream. No dramatic arrest, no courtroom, only restored understanding, a few shared cups of tea, and the quiet knowledge that two small lives had been made a little brighter. Holmes set the violin aside at last and leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. "Watson," he said softly, "shall we review the chain one final time, not for proof, but for the pleasure of seeing how perfectly the links fit?" I smiled and nodded. I should like nothing better. He gazed into the fire for a moment, the flames reflected in his sharp gray eyes. The method is always the same, yet each case teaches something new. We begin with observation, small, precise, seemingly unimportant details. A scratch shaped like an L, a trace of sweet tobacco in a locked room, a single strand of pale worsted thread, a few grains of plaster dust mixed with sea salt, a footprint in damp earth, 3 tiny pin pricks forming a triangle. Any one of these might be dismissed. Together, they form questions, and questions, when pursued without prejudice, become links. He paused, letting the fire crackle fill the silence. In the case of the Red-Headed League, you will remember the extraordinary length of time the criminal spent digging a tunnel beneath the city. Yet, the key clue was the state of the knees of his trousers, worn, smooth, and stained with clay, in a pattern that could only come from kneeling in a confined space for hours. Everyone else saw eccentricity or coincidence. I saw evidence of labor. The chain was forged from dust on boots, knees on cloth, and the peculiar color of the earth itself. Once connected, the whole elaborate plot collapsed like a house of cards. He drew on his pipe thoughtfully. Here, too, the observations were humble. No blood, no broken locks, no desperate flight, yet the chain held just as firmly. The plaster dust proved an entry from outside. The footprint proved the size and sex of the intruder. The worsted thread proved borrowed gloves. The needle pricks proved domestic intent, not theft, but examination. The tobacco scent proved proximity to Lionel without requiring his presence. And the letter itself, hidden for decades, proved the motive was never greed, but love and memory. Holmes's voice grew quieter, almost reflective. What defeats deception is not cleverness alone, but patience. The criminal, if we may call Ellen that, believed her secret safe because it was small and sentimental. She underestimated how much the world remembers through tiny traces, a thread caught on a thorn, a scent that lingers longer than it should, a mark made in haste by a trembling hand. Observation defeats deception because nothing is truly invisible. The ground remembers footsteps. The air remembers fragrance. The metal remembers the needle. And reason, when applied without haste or anger, connects them all. He leaned forward slightly. That is the science of deduction, Watson, not magic, not intuition, but the steady forging of link after link until the chain is unbreakable. In this case, the chain did not bind a villain to punishment. It bound truth to light. It freed an innocent girl from fear. It restored to an old man memories he had almost lost. And it reminded us both that the gentlest mysteries often hold the deepest truths. I sipped my brandy, feeling the warmth spread through me. You were unusually gentle with her, Holmes, from the moment you suspected. He gave a small, rare smile. Sometimes the quarry is not a criminal at all, but a frightened heart. To chain such a one with harshness would be the real crime. He rose and walked to the window, looking down at the fog-wreathed street below. Hansom cabs moved slowly, their wheels hissing on the damp cobbles. A distant foghorn moaned from the river, low, patient, eternal. "London carries on," he said quietly. "Thieves and murderers will come again, but tonight there is only this fire, this room, and the knowledge that one small wrong has been set right without a single harsh word." He turned back to me. "Until the next chain forges, dear listener, rest easy. The game continues, quietly, patiently, and always in search of truth." He returned to his chair, picked up the violin once more, and began to play again. Soft, slow notes that drifted through the room like smoke, blending with the crackle of the fire and the gentle tapping of rain against the window. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the music and the warmth carry me. The compass rested safely on its shelf in Chelsea. The letter lay secure beside a young woman's bed. An old captain slept better than he had in years. And here, by the fire at Baker Street, Two friends sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance. The chain was complete. The mystery had ended, not with triumph or drama, but with the quiet satisfaction of a thing properly understood. And that, I thought, as the music flowed on, was perhaps the finest victory of all.